Tears streamed down Clara Vaughn's face as she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The rouge on her cheeks, unable to hide the hollow despair that had settled there during her 3 months at the Gilded Cage Saloon. It was 1878 in Pyramid City, Nevada, a rough-and-tumble mining settlement that had sprung up virtually overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains, and Clara's dreams had died just as quickly as the town had been born. 5 minutes, girl. Madame Rosalie's harsh voice called through the thin door. And you better put on a happier face than that. Nobody pays to see a weeping woman. Clara hastily wiped her tears and applied more powder. At 22, she had never imagined this would be her fate, forced to dance for leering men in a saloon after her father's death had left her with mounting debts and nowhere to turn. The contract she'd signed with Madame Rosalie had seemed like salvation at first, but quickly revealed itself as a prison sentence. 3 years of her life sold away, with barely enough of her earnings returned to her for basic necessities. The tinny piano music grew louder as the evening crowd swelled. Saturday nights were always the busiest, with miners fresh from their claims and cowboys passing through town, all with pockets full of money and minds full of whiskey. Clara pinned a wilting silk flower to her gaudy red dress, pulled her shoulders back, and tried to summon the strength for another performance. The other girls often embraced their roles, finding power in the attention, but Clara couldn't shake the shame that clung to her like the cheap perfume Madame Rosalie insisted they all wear. When she emerged from behind the curtain onto the small stage, the usual chorus of whoops and hollers greeted her. She focused her gaze just above the crowd, a trick she'd learned to avoid making eye contact with anyone. The piano player launched into a lively tune, and Clara began to dance, her feet moving mechanically through the steps while her mind drifted far away. She barely noticed the saloon doors swing open, barely registered the tall figure who entered and stood quietly at the back of the room, watching her performance with an intensity that differed from the lecherous stares of the other patrons. Owen Armstrong had not intended to stop in Pyramid City for more than a night. He was driving a small herd of cattle north to a buyer in Carson City, and this desert town was merely a convenient place to rest. 30 years old with weathered skin that made him look older, Owen had spent the last decade roaming the territories, working wherever there was honest pay to be found. He'd saved carefully, building toward his dream of his own ranch someday, and had no intention of wasting his money in a saloon. Yet something about the dancer on the stage had stopped him in his tracks. Unlike the other girls who smiled and flirted with the crowd, this one danced as though she were 1,000 miles away. There was a dignity in her movements, despite the tawdry setting, that spoke of someone who didn't belong in this place. "Quite a looker, ain't she?" a red-faced miner said, nudging Owen. "That's Clara. Madam keeps her in the fancy dresses 'cause she draws the biggest crowds. Won't let her entertain private like though, no matter how much you offer." Owen didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on Clara as she finished her dance with a curtsy that seemed almost defiant. As she stepped off the stage, he noticed the way Madame Rosalie grabbed her arm roughly, whispering something that made Clara's shoulders slump before she straightened them again, chin held high. He found himself moving toward the bar, ordering a whiskey he didn't really want just to have a reason to stay. Throughout the evening, he watched as Clara performed 2 more times, each dance more spirited than the last to please the increasingly rowdy crowd. But he also noticed how she flinched when patrons reached for her, how she retreated to a corner between performances, eyes downcast, speaking to no one. Near midnight, a commotion broke out when a drunken cowhand tried to pull Clara onto his lap. She struggled against his grip until Madame Rosalie's bouncer intervened, tossing the man out into the street. Clara stood trembling, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. "That's enough for tonight," Madame Rosalie announced to disappointed groans. "The girls need their beauty rest." As the crowd began to disperse, Owen approached the older woman who was counting the night's earnings behind the bar. "Madam, I'd like a word with you about one of your dancers," he said quietly. The woman looked up, shrewd eyes assessing him. "If you're asking about private time with Clara, the answer is no. She's for dancing only." "That's not what I'm after," Owen replied. "I'd like to know about her contract." Madame Rosalie's eyebrows rose. "Her contract? What business is that of yours, Cowboy? I'm willing to make it my business." "How much to buy her out?" the madam laughed, a harsh sound that drew glances from the remaining patrons. "You must be new to town. Every man who sees her dance gets the same fool notion. Clara's contract runs another 2 years and 7 months. She brings in more business than any 3 girls combined. Why would I let her go?" "Because everyone has a price," Owen said calmly, meeting her gaze. "Name yours." Something in his steady demeanor made Madame Rosalie pause. She studied him for a long moment. "You don't look like you have that kind of money. Try me." The next morning, Clara was summoned to Madame Rosalie's private office, a small room off the main floor of the saloon that smelled of stale cigar smoke and cheap perfume. The madam sat behind her desk, a ledger open before her. "You've caught yourself an admirer, it seems," she said without preamble. Clara's stomach tightened. She'd heard these words before, had endured countless propositions from men who thought they could buy her affections or her body. "I'm not interested." "This one's different," Madame Rosalie said, her tone unusually thoughtful. "He wants to buy out your contract." Clara blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Buy out my—" "That's not possible. You've always said—" "I know what I've always said," the older woman snapped. "But this one's persistent. And he's offering a fair sum." She named a figure that made Clara's eyes widen. Who would pay that much? And for what purpose? Fear crept into her voice. Sometimes men from the fancy brothels in larger cities came looking for new girls, offering to buy contracts only to place women in even worse situations. Says his name is Owen Armstrong. Cattle driver, by the looks of him, though he's got the manner of someone who's seen better days. Claims he wants to set you free, no strings attached. Madame Rosalie snorted. "Men always think they're heroes until they get what they want." Clara's mind raced. Freedom was the dream she'd abandoned months ago, after her initial attempts to earn enough to buy out her own contract had proven futile. "I don't understand. I don't know this man. Why would he do this?" "That's for you to ask him," the madam replied, closing her ledger with a snap. "He's waiting in the dining room. I've told him I'll consider his offer depending on what you want." "What I want?" Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Since when has that mattered to you?" Madame Rosalie's expression hardened. "Don't mistake business for cruelty, girl. This place saved you from starving on the streets, didn't it? But I'm not in the business of holding people against their will if there's profit in letting them go." She stood up. "Talk to him. If you want out and he's genuine, I'll take his money." Clara's heart pounded as she followed Madame Rosalie to the dining room, a modest space where the girls took their meals when not working. A tall man stood as they entered, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with a touch of premature gray at the temples. His face was tanned from the sun, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the harsh western light. "Miss Vaughn," he said with a slight nod, his voice deeper than she'd expected. "I'm Owen Armstrong." Madame Rosalie looked between them. "You have 15 minutes," she said before leaving them alone, Clara remained standing, keeping the table between them. "Mr. Armstrong, I'm told you wish to purchase my contract. Why?" Owen gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you sit, please?" After a moment's hesitation, Clara perched on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid. "I saw you dance last night," he began. "And I saw something else too, that you don't belong here." Clara's defenses rose immediately. "You know nothing about me or where I belong." "That's true," he conceded. "But I know what it looks like when someone's trapped in a life they didn't choose. I've been there myself." His honesty caught her off guard. Clara studied him more carefully. Unlike most men who frequented the saloon, his gaze remained respectfully on her face, and there was no hint of liquor on his breath despite the early hour. "What do you want from me?" she asked bluntly. "If you think purchasing my contract entitles you to—" "No," he interrupted firmly. "That's not my intention. I want to offer you your freedom, nothing more." Clara laughed softly, disbelief evident. "Men don't simply hand over small fortunes expecting nothing in return." Owen leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Miss Vaughn, I've spent 10 years working across the Western Territories. I've seen good people forced into bad situations, and I've seen how quickly life can turn cruel. I have the means to help you, and that's all I aim to do." "And then what?" Clara challenged. "Even if I believed you, where would I go? What would I do? I have no family, no home. I'm driving cattle to Carson City. You'd be welcome to travel with me that far after that." He shrugged. "That would be for you to decide. I know people who might offer honest work. Or you could go wherever you please." Clara sat back, mind whirling with possibilities. Freedom had seemed so far beyond reach that she hardly knew how to consider it as a reality. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded document, placing it on the table between them. "This is a promise, in writing, that I make no claim on you or your future. If Madame Rosalie accepts my offer, you walk away completely free." Clara stared at the paper but didn't reach for it. "I still don't understand why you do this." Owen was quiet for a long moment. "My sister found herself in a similar situation once. No one helped her. I wasn't in a position to then." His eyes met hers, filled with a compassion that made her breath catch. "I am now." When Madame Rosalie returned, Clara had made her decision. By sunset, the transaction was complete. Owen Armstrong handed over a substantial portion of his savings money that had been intended for his own future, and received in return a signed document releasing Clara Vaughn from her contract with the Gilded Cage. Clara packed her few belongings with trembling hands, still unable to believe this sudden turn of events. The other girls watched with a mixture of envy and concern, whispering about what fate truly awaited her with the mysterious cowboy. "You be careful," Lily, the youngest dancer, said as she helped Clara fold a dress. "Men who act noble often ain't." "I'll be fine," Clara assured her, though her own doubts still lingered. "He's taking me to Carson City. I can find work there." "And if he expects payment of another kind before you get there," Clara's hands stilled, "then I'll leave. I'd rather take my chances on the open road than spend another day here." She looked around the small room that had been her prison for months. "At least out there, I'd be making my own choices." When she descended the stairs with her carpet bag, Owen was waiting in the saloon's main room, engaged in quiet conversation with Madame Rosalie. Both looked up as Clara approached. "All set?" Owen asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The reality of leaving was suddenly overwhelming. Madame Rosalie stepped forward, surprising Clara by pressing a small purse into her hands. "Your final wages," she explained. "Not much, but it might help until you find your feet." Clara accepted the unexpected gesture with a murmured thanks. Despite everything, there had been moments when Madame Rosalie had shown kindness in her own way. "Take care of yourself," the older woman said, then added with a sharp look at Owen, "and if he doesn't treat you right, you come back here. I'll deal with him." Owen tipped his hat to the madam. "She won't need to." The late afternoon sun was blinding after the dim interior of the saloon. Clara squinted as she followed Owen to where two horses stood waiting. A small herd of cattle grazed under the watchful eye of a young cowhand at the edge of town. "That's Samson," Owen explained, nodding toward the dappled gray horse. "He's gentle enough. Can you ride?" "Yes," Clara replied. "My father taught me when I was young." Owen helped secure her bag, then offered her a hand up, which she accepted after only a slight hesitation. The leather saddle was worn but well maintained, and the horse responded easily to her touch. "We'll make camp a few miles north tonight," Owen said, mounting his own horse. "Join up with the rest of my men and the herd in the morning. It's about a week's journey to Carson City, depending on the weather and the cattle." Clara nodded, looking back at the saloon one last time. For months it had been her cage, yet now she felt a strange uncertainty at leaving its walls. At least there, she had known what to expect. The open country before her offered freedom, but also the terrifying unknown. "Ready?" Owen asked, watching her carefully. Clara took a deep breath and turned her horse toward the north road. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I'm ready." They rode in companionable silence, as the town of Pyramid City fell away behind them. The vast Nevada landscape stretched out in all directions, red-brown earth dotted with sagebrush, jagged mountains rising in the distance, and above it all, a vast sky painted with the amber hues of approaching sunset. Clara found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait, memories of happier times riding with her father gradually replacing the tension of the day. When they'd gone a few miles, Owen guided them toward a small creek where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade. "This seems a good spot to make camp," he said, dismounting. "There's water for the horses and shelter if the wind picks up." Clara slid from her saddle, wincing slightly as her muscles protested the unaccustomed exercise. She stood awkwardly for a moment, unsure of her role. Owen seemed to sense her discomfort. "There's not much to do just yet. Why don't you rest while I take care of the horses?" Clara settled beneath one of the cottonwoods, watching as Owen efficiently unsaddled the horses and led them to drink. There was a quiet competence in his movements that she found reassuring. When he'd finished, he gathered wood for a small fire. "Are you hungry?" he asked as flames began to lick at the dry branches. "I've got some jerky and biscuits." "Nothing fancy, but it'll keep us going until tomorrow when we reach the chuck wagon." "Thank you," Clara said, accepting the simple food. As they ate, she studied him more openly than she had dared to in the saloon. His clothes were worn but clean, his manner straightforward without being rough. Unlike many Western men she'd encountered, he seemed comfortable with silence. "May I ask you something, Mr. Armstrong?" she ventured after they'd eaten. "Owen, please," he corrected gently. "And yes, you may ask me anything. You mentioned your sister was in a situation like mine." "What happened to her?" A shadow passed over his face. "Emily was 16 when our parents died. I was 20, working as a ranch hand in Colorado. By the time I could get back to Missouri, she'd fallen in with people who promised to take care of her." His jaw tightened. "Instead, they brought her west and sold her to a brothel in Denver." Clara's hand went to her throat. "How awful. Were you able to help her?" "I tried. Took me nearly a year to find her by then." He stared into the fire. "She'd gotten sick, consumption. I got her out, but it was too late. She died 3 weeks later." "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered. Owen nodded, his expression distant. I made her a promise as she was dying that if I ever had the chance to keep another young woman from that fate, I would. He looked up, meeting Clara's gaze directly. That's why I couldn't just ride past when I saw you dancing. You had the same look in your eyes that Emily did, like your soul was somewhere else, refusing to be part of what was happening to your body. Clara felt tears welling up at his unexpected insight. It was, she admitted. Every night, I would imagine myself somewhere else in the home I grew up in, or in some future place where I was free. And now you are, Owen said softly. Thanks to you. Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her since their meeting. The money you paid. It must have been nearly everything you had. Not everything, he said with a small smile, but enough that my plans will need some adjusting. What plans? I've been saving to buy land, a small ranch in Northern California. Nothing grand, just a place of my own. He shrugged. It'll take longer now, that's all. Clara looked away, guilt washing over her. I've cost you your dream. No, Owen said firmly. You haven't cost me anything I wasn't willing to give. Dreams can wait. Some things can't. His words hung in the air between them as darkness settled around their small camp. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill, watching the fire's glow illuminate Owen's face. For the first time in months, she felt the stirring of something that might have been hope. Get some sleep, Owen said eventually, spreading a bedroll for her a respectable distance from his own. We've got a long day tomorrow. As Clara lay beneath the star-filled sky, the enormity of the day's events finally overwhelmed her. Silent tears of relief and lingering fear slid down her temples and into her hair. She had her freedom, but freedom, she was discovering, carried its own kind of terror. What would become of her now? Who was she, if not the trapped dancer from the Gilded Cage? She turned her head slightly to where Owen slept, or at least rested with his hat pulled low over his eyes. This stranger had changed the course of her life in a single day, asking nothing in return. It seemed impossible, yet here she was. Clara closed her eyes, letting the gentle sounds of the night wash over her, the soft nickering of the horses, the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves, the distant call of a coyote. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without dread for the morning to come. Dawn broke with a brilliance that startled Clara from sleep. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't place where she was, then the events of the previous day rushed back. She sat up quickly, looking around the camp. Owen was already awake, tending to a small fire where a pot of coffee bubbled. He glanced up as she stirred. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's almost ready if you'd like some." Clara smoothed her hair and rose, feeling strangely self-conscious in her rumpled traveling dress. At the saloon, appearances had been a matter of business. Now she found herself caring what this man thought of her for entirely different reasons. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth was welcome against the morning chill. "How far do we ride today?" "About 15 miles, Owen replied, pouring his own coffee. "We'll meet up with my men and the herd by midday. There's 3 of them, all good fellas. They know to expect you." Clara nodded, a flutter of nervousness at the thought of meeting more strangers. "And they won't mind my presence, I mean." Owen's expression softened. "They work for me, Miss Vaughn, but more than that, they're decent men. You have nothing to worry about." As they packed up camp and prepared to ride, Clara found herself watching Owen with growing curiosity. In the clear light of morning, she could see that he was a handsome man in a weathered way, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he spoke. There was a gentleness to his manner that stood in stark contrast to the rough men she'd grown accustomed to at the saloon. They rode north at a steady pace, following the meandering creek through increasingly rugged terrain. Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels through the territory. Clara listened, gradually relaxing enough to offer stories of her own of growing up the daughter of a schoolteacher in Kansas, of her dreams to become a teacher herself before her father's illness had drained their savings and left her desperate. "Is that still what you want?" Owen asked. "To teach?" Clara considered the question. "I don't know any more. So much has changed. I'm not sure any school would hire me now, knowing where I've been." "People don't need to know everything about your past," Owen said. "Carson City's growing fast. They need teachers." "Perhaps," Clara said, though doubt lingered. How could she stand before a classroom of children when just days before she'd been dancing for the entertainment of drunken men? Around midday, they crested a small ridge and Clara saw the cattle herd spread across the valley below, about 60 head grazing peacefully, while 3 riders circled the perimeter. "There they are," Owen said, raising his arm in greeting. One of the riders spotted them and waved back, then broke away to ride up to meet them. "Boss, beginning to think you changed your mind about joining us," the young man called as he approached. He was barely out of his teens with a shock of sandy hair and a freckled face. "Just took care of some business in town, Donovan," Owen replied. "This is Miss Clara Vaughn. She'll be traveling with us to Carson City." The young cowhand tipped his hat, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Clara. "Madam, it's a pleasure." "Thank you," Clara replied, attempting a smile despite her discomfort at his obvious surprise. "Everything been quiet?" Owen asked, smoothly redirecting the conversation. "Yes, sir. Cattle are moving well. We found a good spot to bed down tonight, about 5 miles ahead, sheltered valley, with plenty of grass and a spring." As they rode down to join the herd, and the other 2 cowhands introduced as Hank, a grizzled older man with a perpetually squinting eye, and Miguel, a quiet Mexican vaquero with impressive skill on horseback, Clara felt the weight of their curious glances. Owen had clearly not explained her presence beyond saying she would be joining them, and speculation was evident in their expressions. The men were polite, however, and as they resumed the cattle drive, Clara found herself riding alongside Donovan, who seemed the most eager for conversation. "You from around these parts, Miss Vaughn?" he asked. "No," she replied carefully. "I've been in Pyramid City for only a few months. Before that, Kansas." "Kansas? That's a long way to travel. You got family out this way?" "No family," she said, the familiar ache returning at the thought of her father, buried in an unmarked grave when she couldn't afford a proper headstone. "I'm hoping to find work in Carson City." Donovan nodded sagely, as though he understood perfectly. "Lots of opportunity there these days. My cousin found work in a hotel. Says they're hiring all sorts." Clara smiled at his enthusiasm. "That's good to know." Throughout the afternoon, as they guided the herd across the valley floor, Clara became aware of Owen watching her from time to time. Not in the predatory way she'd grown accustomed to at the saloon, but with a thoughtful expression that made her wonder what he was thinking. When they made camp that evening, Clara offered to help with the cooking, eager to be useful rather than simply a burden on their journey. Hank, who served as the chuck wagon cook, accepted her assistance with gruff appreciation. "You know how to make biscuits, Missy?" he asked as he prepared to start dinner. "I do," Clara replied, rolling up her sleeves. "My father always said mine were light as clouds." "We'll see about that," Hank said, but there was a twinkle in his eye as he handed her the flour sack. As Clara worked the dough, she became aware of a sense of contentment that had been absent from her life for too long. The simple act of creating something with her hands, the smell of coffee brewing and bacon sizzling, the open sky above all combined to make her feel more human than she had in months. Across the camp, Owen was engaged in conversation with Miguel, discussing the next day's route, but his gaze frequently drifted to where Clara worked alongside Hank. There was something about the way she had seamlessly inserted herself into their routine, her quiet dignity despite her circumstances, that stirred something deep within him. He'd meant what he said about expecting nothing in return for her freedom. His intention had been purely to help her escape a life she hadn't chosen, then see her safely to Carson City where she could start anew. Yet as he watched her laugh at something Hank said, flour dusting her cheeks, Owen realized with a start that he was already dreading their eventual parting. Dinner that night was a more lively affair than usual, with Clara's presence somehow elevating the conversation beyond the usual trail talk. Even Hank, normally taciturn, shared stories of his early days riding with the Pony Express. Clara listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed her intelligence and natural curiosity. When the meal was finished and the men began to settle in for the night, Clara helped clean up, then found a spot a bit removed from the others to prepare for sleep. Owen approached, carrying an extra blanket. "Nights get cold out here," he said, offering it to her. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you," Clara said, accepting the blanket gratefully. "For everything. Your men are very kind," Owen smiled. "They're good fellas, simple maybe but honest." Clara adjusted her bedroll, then looked up at him. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. What will you do after Carson City? Will you have enough money left to continue toward your dream?" Owen settled on a nearby rock, considering her question. "I'll keep working cattle drives for a while longer. There's decent money in it if you're careful. Another year or two, maybe I'll have enough saved again." "I wish there was some way I could repay you," Clara said softly. "What you did for me. It's more than anyone has ever done." "Seeing you free is payment enough," Owen assured her. "And knowing the money went to a worthy cause rather than being lost in some card game, which was probably the other possibility." His attempt at humor drew a small smile from Clara. "Still," she insisted, "I want you to know that I understand the sacrifice you made, and I promise I won't waste the chance you've given me." Owen nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak past the tightness in his throat. There was something about the earnestness in her eyes, the quiet strength she'd shown despite everything she'd endured, that moved him deeply. "Get some rest," he said finally. "We've got many miles to cover tomorrow." As he walked back to his own bedroll, Owen acknowledged to himself what he'd been trying to deny, that Clara Vaughn was becoming more than just a good deed to him. And that realization brought both joy and concern. The last thing she needed was another man imposing his desires on her life, even if those desires were wrapped in more honorable intentions than most. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm as they made their way north. Clara adapted quickly to life on the trail, rising early each morning to help with breakfast, then riding alongside the herd during the day. The men grew accustomed to her presence, treating her with a respectful camaraderie that helped ease her lingering fears. Owen found himself increasingly drawn to her company, seeking her out during the quieter moments of the journey. They spoke of books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see, dreams they'd harbored before life had intervened. Clara revealed herself to be well-educated and thoughtful, with a quiet wit that emerged more frequently as she relaxed into their friendship. For her part, Clara discovered that Owen was unlike any man she'd known, steadfast without being rigid, kind without being weak. He spoke of his plans for the future with a humble determination that made her believe he would eventually achieve them, despite the setback he'd accepted on her behalf. On the fourth day of their journey, they encountered their first real challenge when a summer storm blew in from the west, bringing with it driving rain and wind that spooked the cattle. Owen and his men worked tirelessly to keep the herd together, while Clara helped Hank secure the chuck wagon against the gale. By nightfall, everyone was soaked through and exhausted, but the herd had been contained with only 2 steers lost to a ravine. They made a hasty camp in the lee of a rocky outcropping, where Hank managed to get a fire going despite the damp conditions. "Everyone all right?" Owen asked as they huddled around the flames, steam rising from their wet clothing. There were tired nods all around. Clara sat slightly apart, shivering despite the fire's warmth. Her dress, not designed for such conditions, clung to her uncomfortably. Owen noticed her discomfort and quietly retrieved a dry shirt and jacket from his saddlebags, which had been protected from the worst of the rain. "Here," he said, offering them to her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Clara hesitated, glancing at the men around the fire. "There's a small overhang just behind those rocks," Owen added, understanding her concern. "It should give you enough privacy." With a grateful nod, Clara took the offered clothing and made her way to the spot he'd indicated. The men deliberately kept their attention on their own discomforts, affording her the dignity of privacy. When she returned, Owen's shirt hung loosely on her smaller frame, the sleeves rolled up several times, but it was dry and warm. His jacket similarly engulfed her, but provided welcome protection against the night chill. She'd done her best to wring out her dress, which now hung from a branch near the fire in hopes of drying by morning. "Better?" Owen asked as she rejoined them. "Much," Clara replied, offering him a smile that made something twist pleasantly in his chest. "Thank you." The rain continued through the night, drumming steadily on the ground around their sheltered camp. Sleep came fitfully for most, but Clara found herself strangely content despite the discomfort. There was something fundamentally honest about weathering a storm in the open country, so different from the artificial comforts of the saloon. She watched Owen across the dying fire, his hat pulled low against the occasional gust that brought rain into their shelter. Even in rest, there was a vigilance to him, as though part of him remained alert to any threat to his people or his herd. Clara wondered what it would be like to always feel that protected, to know that someone stood between you and the world's harsher elements. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed landscape gleaming in the early sun. Clara's dress was still damp in places, but wearable enough for the day's journey. As she changed back into it behind the same rocks as the night before, she found herself oddly reluctant to return Owen's clothing, which carried the faint scent of him leather and wood smoke, and something indefinably reassuring. When she emerged, Owen was checking on the horses, his back to her as she approached. "Your shirt and jacket," she said, holding them out. "Thank you for the loan." He turned, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes as he looked at her, something that made her breath catch. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual calm demeanor. "You're welcome," he said, taking the garments. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a brief contact that nonetheless sent a current of awareness through Clara. They stood regarding each other for a moment longer than necessary, the morning sun casting a golden light over the scene. Clara found herself noticing details she'd overlooked before: the exact shade of his eyes, more green than brown in this light, the small scar at the corner of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly when damp. It was Donovan's call that broke the moment, his voice carrying from the other side of camp. "Boss, Hank says breakfast is ready when you are." Owen stepped back, his expression returning to one of friendly professionalism. "We should eat. Long day ahead." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the curious flutter in her stomach as she followed him back to camp. The day's journey proceeded without incident, the cattle moving well after their enforced rest during the storm. By late afternoon, They had made up much of the distance lost the previous day. "If we keep this pace, we'll reach Carson City in 3 more days," Owen told Clara as they rode side by side, a little apart from the others. "Sooner than I'd originally thought." Clara felt an unexpected pang at the news. "That's good," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Owen glanced at her. "Having second thoughts about Carson City?" "No, it's not that," Clara assured him quickly. "It's just—" She hesitated, uncertain how to express the conflicting emotions within her. "These past days have been so different from what I expected. I was terrified when I left Pyramid City, convinced that I was simply exchanging one form of captivity for another. Instead, I've found freedom," Owen suggested when she trailed off. "Yes, but more than that. A kind of peace I'd forgotten was possible." She looked at him directly. "I owe that to you." Owen shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. The strength was always in you. I just helped clear the path a little." His use of her given name the first time he'd done so didn't escape her notice, nor did the warmth it brought to her cheeks. "Nevertheless," she said softly, "I'm grateful, and—" She took a deep breath. "I'm finding I'm not as eager to reach Carson City as I thought I would be." Owen's hands tightened imperceptibly on his reins. "No, no," Clara confirmed, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about what comes after, about finding work, making a new life. And I've realized something: I don't want to simply exist in safety. I want to live with purpose." "What kind of purpose did you have in mind?" Owen asked, his voice carefully neutral. Clara looked out over the landscape stretching before them. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know I want it to be meaningful, something that helps others, perhaps." She glanced at him. "Something that honors what you did for me." Owen was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he said, "Whatever you choose, Clara, I have no doubt you'll excel at it. You have a strength in you that most people never find." His faith in her, so simply stated yet so profound, brought tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Clara found herself stealing glances at Owen's profile, wondering at the turn her life had taken, and the unexpected feelings developing within her. It wasn't until they made camp that evening that Clara found an opportunity to speak with Owen privately again. The men had turned in early, tired from the previous day's exertions, leaving Clara and Owen sitting by the fire. "May I ask you something personal?" Clara ventured after they'd sat in comfortable silence for some time. Owen nodded. "You can ask. I can't promise I'll have a good answer." "Why have you never married? You're kind, successful in your way, certainly not." She gestured vaguely. "Unpleasant to look at." Owen's eyebrows rose slightly at her blunt question, then he chuckled. "Not unpleasant to look at, high praise indeed." Clara felt heat rise to her face. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," he assured her, still smiling. Then his expression grew more serious. "The truth is, I came close once. Her name was Margaret. We were young. I was 22, she was 19. I just started working as a ranch hand, thought I was on my way to making something of myself." "What happened?" Clara asked gently. Owen stared into the fire. "Her father happened. He was a banker, had bigger plans for his daughter than a cowboy with nothing but dreams to his name. When I couldn't be dissuaded from courting her, he arranged a job for me with a cattle outfit heading to Wyoming. Promised it was a great opportunity." His mouth twisted. "By the time I returned 3 months later, Margaret was engaged to a lawyer from Sacramento." "I'm sorry," Clara said, genuinely moved by the hurt still evident in his voice. Owen shrugged. "It was a long time ago. But it taught me something important, that I wouldn't offer my heart again until I had something real to offer alongside it. No more dreams and promises. Something solid. He looked at her directly. That's why the land matters so much. It's something no one can take away, something that would be mine and someday, my family's forever. The intensity in his gaze made Clara's heart quicken. And now that goal is further away because of me. Some things are worth the delay, Owen said quietly. The implications of his words hung between them, neither willing to acknowledge them directly yet neither looking away. Finally, Clara broke the charged silence. It's getting late, she said, though she made no move to leave. Owen nodded. It is. He hesitated, then added, Carson City isn't the only place with opportunities, you know. Northern California has growing towns, schools that need teachers, land that needs claiming. Clara's breath caught at what he seemed to be suggesting. Are you saying? I'm not saying anything definite, Owen clarified quickly. Just options for you to consider. He stood, offering her his hand to help her up. We still have a few days before decisions need to be made. Clara placed her hand in his, allowing him to pull her to her feet. They stood close, their joined hands between them, neither quite ready to let go. Options, Clara repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Owen's smile in response warmed her more than the fire had. Good night, Clara. Good night, Owen. As she made her way to her bedroll, Clara felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her, a feeling that had been absent for so long she'd almost forgotten its shape. Whatever lay ahead in Carson City or beyond, she was facing it as a free woman with choices of her own making. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift Owen Armstrong had given her. The final days of their journey passed both too quickly and not quickly enough, filled with the routine work of moving cattle and making camp, yet charged with a new awareness between Clara and Owen. They sought each other's company in quiet moments, conversations flowing easily between them on subjects ranging from favorite books to childhood memories to hopes for the future. Clara found herself speaking of dreams she'd long since buried of having a home of her own someday, perhaps children, a life filled with purpose and love. Owen listened with an attentiveness that made her feel truly heard, perhaps for the first time in her life. In turn, he shared more of his own aspirations not just for land, but for what that land represented. A place of belonging, of legacy, of building something that would outlast him. I want to raise horses eventually, he confided as they rode ahead of the herd one morning. Good stock that working men can afford. My father was a horse trainer before he took to drinking. It's the one thing he taught me that was worth learning. You never speak much of your parents, Clara observed. Owen's expression darkened slightly. Not much worth telling. My father had a way with horses and a weakness for whiskey. My mother had a kind heart but no spine to stand up to him. They loved each other and us in their way, but it wasn't enough to overcome their flaws. Clara considered this. Yet you turned out differently. I chose to, Owen said simply. We all have that choice, I think. To repeat the patterns we're given or to forge new ones. His words resonated deeply with Clara, who had feared that her time at the saloon had somehow marked her irrevocably. The idea that she could choose a different path, that her past didn't have to determine her future, was both liberating and terrifying in its responsibility. On the afternoon of the 7th day, they crested a rise and saw Carson City spread out in the valley below. Even from a distance, Clara could see it was substantially larger than Pyramid City, with proper streets laid out in a grid, numerous businesses, and what appeared to be a small church steeple rising near the center. There it is, Owen said, reining in beside her. Carson City. Clara nodded, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within her. Part of her was eager to begin her new life, to test her newfound freedom in a place where no one knew her past. Another part was reluctant to leave the safety she'd found in Owen's company, the easy camaraderie of the trail, the simplicity of days measured by sunrise and sunset rather than society's expectations. "We'll deliver the cattle to the stockyards on the south side of town," Owen explained. "Then find lodging. There's a decent hotel that caters to respectable women traveling alone if that's what you prefer. Or—" He hesitated and Clara turned to look at him fully. "Or," she prompted. Owen met her gaze directly, "or you could continue on with me. After I settle accounts here, I'm heading west to look at a parcel of land near the California border. It would mean another week of travel at least, but it would give you more time to consider your options." Clara's heart quickened at the invitation. "Is that what you want? For me to continue with you?" "Yes," Owen answered without hesitation. "But what I want isn't what matters here. This has to be your choice, Clara, completely your choice." The sincerity in his eyes nearly undid her. After months of having no control over her fate, the gift of choice was almost overwhelming. Clara looked back at Carson City, then at the vast country stretching west beyond it. "I need time to think," she said finally. Owen nodded. "Of course. There's no rush to decide." They rejoined the herd and continued toward town. By late afternoon, they had reached the stockyards, where Owen's cattle were counted and corralled pending final sale the next day. The men were in high spirits, anticipating their pay and the pleasures of town after weeks on the trail. "I've booked rooms for all of us at the Sierra Hotel," Owen told them as they settled the horses. "We'll meet for dinner at 7. Clara accompanied Owen to the hotel, a respectable establishment on the main street. The desk clerk raised his eyebrows slightly at Clara's travel-worn appearance, but was quickly silenced by Owen's authoritative manner as he requested 2 separate rooms. "Will you be joining us for dinner?" Owen asked as he walked Clara to her room on the second floor. "Yes, I'd like that," she replied, "though I'm afraid I have nothing suitable to wear." Owen reached into his pocket and withdrew a small portion of the payment he'd received as an advance on the cattle sale. "Consider this an advance on whatever future you choose," he said, pressing the money into her hand. "There's a dress shop down the street that should still be open." Clara started to protest, but Owen shook his head. "Please, let me do this one last thing for you." Reluctantly, she accepted. "Thank you. I'll see you at dinner." The luxury of a private room with a real bed and a porcelain washbasin felt almost decadent after days on the trail. Clara bathed as best she could, washing away the dust of travel and scrubbing her hair until it shone. Then, with the money Owen had given her, she ventured to the dress shop. The proprietress, a plump woman named Mrs. Bennett, was initially cool toward the obviously travel-worn young woman who entered her establishment, but warmed considerably when Clara explained she needed something suitable for dinner at the Sierra Hotel. "Traveling with your husband, Mrs. Bennett inquired as she showed Clara several ready-made dresses. "No," Clara replied carefully. "With business associates. I'm considering teaching positions in the area." This explanation seemed to satisfy the shopkeeper, who helped Clara select a modest but becoming dress of deep blue cotton, along with necessary undergarments and a pair of simple but well-made boots. "You have the look of an educated woman," Mrs. Bennett commented as she wrapped Clara's purchases. "The school board is always seeking qualified teachers. My husband is a member, in fact. I could arrange an introduction if you're interested." Clara thanked her, neither accepting nor declining the offer. As she walked back to the hotel, packages in hand, she realized she still hadn't decided whether to stay in Carson City or continue on with Owen. Both paths held promise, yet also uncertainty. At 7 o'clock precisely, Clara descended to the hotel dining room, Her new dress fitted perfectly to her slender frame, her hair arranged simply but neatly. The conversation among Owen's men stuttered to a halt as she approached their table, all four men rising to their feet. Owen, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes that, while still those of a working man, showed him to good advantage, stared at her with undisguised appreciation. "Miss Vaughn," he said, recovering himself enough to pull out her chair. "You look lovely." "Thank you," Clara replied, smiling at the genuine admiration in his eyes. "A bath and clean clothes can work wonders." Dinner was a pleasant affair with good food and lively conversation. The men were on their best behavior, clearly making an effort to impress Clara with their manners. Even Hank had replaced his usual bandana with a somewhat wrinkled necktie for the occasion. As the meal progressed, Clara found herself watching Owen the way he engaged each of his men in conversation, ensuring no one was left out, the respect with which he treated the serving staff, the quiet authority he commanded without ever raising his voice. She compared him to the men she'd encountered at the saloon, who viewed women as commodities to be purchased and discarded, and felt a surge of gratitude for whatever fate had brought him into her life. After dinner, the younger men excused themselves to explore the town's offerings, while Hank retired to his room, complaining good-naturedly about bones too old for revelry. This left Clara and Owen alone at the table, lingering over coffee. "So," Owen said after a comfortable silence, "have you given any thought to what comes next?" Clara nodded slowly. "I have. The shopkeeper where I bought this dress mentioned that her husband is on the school board. She offered to arrange an introduction." "That sounds promising," Owen said, though Clara thought she detected a note of disappointment in his voice. "It does," she agreed. "Carson City seems like a respectable place. I could build a new life here." Owen nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I have no doubt you'd succeed at whatever you set your mind to." Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "But I've been thinking about what you said about options, and about choices." "And," Owen prompted when she paused, "and I find I'm curious about this land you're considering." "About Northern California." She met his gaze steadily. "If the offer still stands, I'd like to continue on with you." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise after a long night. "The offer stands," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We'll leave the day after tomorrow, once I've concluded my business here." They sat looking at each other across the table, possibility hanging in the air between them. Finally, Owen reached across and gently took her hand. "Clara," he began, then seemed to struggle for words. "I want you to know that there are no expectations attached to this. You're free to go your own way at any point. I've come to value your company more than I expected to." Clara turned her hand in his so their palms met, fingers interlacing. "As I've come to value yours," she said softly. "I don't know what the future holds, Owen, but I'd like to discover it alongside you if that's acceptable." His fingers tightened around hers. "More than acceptable," he replied, his eyes conveying far more than his simple words. They remained that way for a long moment, connected by joined hands and shared hope, before reluctantly parting for the night. As Clara lay in her comfortable hotel bed, sleep eluded her as she contemplated the decision she'd made. It wasn't just about continuing the journey with Owen. It was about allowing herself to imagine a future that included him in a more permanent way. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. After her experiences at the saloon, she had believed herself incapable of trusting a man again, had resigned herself to a life of independence if she ever regained her freedom. Yet here she was, her heart opening to possibilities she'd thought forever closed to her. The next day passed in a flurry of activity as Owen concluded his business dealings. selling the cattle for a fair price and settling accounts with his men. Clara took the opportunity to explore Carson City, finding it a bustling, growing community with amenities she hadn't seen since leaving Kansas, a proper school, a lending library, shops selling goods from as far away as Europe. She found herself mentally comparing it to the vague descriptions Owen had given of the area he was considering in Northern California. Carson City offered certainty, established society, potential employment, the comfort of civilization. Owen's destination offered only possibility, a blank canvas on which to paint a new life. The choice wasn't simply between places, she realized, but between safety and risk, between the known and the unknown. By evening, when she met Owen for dinner again, Clara had reaffirmed her decision. Whatever uncertainty lay ahead, the thought of parting from him was more daunting still. "Everything's settled," Owen told her as they ate. "Donovan and Miguel have signed on with another outfit heading north. Hanks decided to stay in Carson City, says his bones are too old for more travel this season." "And us?" Clara asked. "When do we leave?" "First light tomorrow," Owen replied. "It's about a week's ride to the property I'm looking at if the weather holds, longer if it doesn't." Clara nodded, excitement and nervousness warring within her. "I'll be ready." Owen studied her face. "You're sure about this? Carson City has a lot to offer a woman with your abilities." "I'm sure," Clara said firmly. "Carson City will still be here if things don't work out as we hope." The significance of her words wasn't lost on Owen. His expression softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand, much as he had the night before. "I can't promise you an easy life," he said quietly. "Building something from nothing never is. But I can promise you this: you'll never again be bound by any contract, not of your own choosing. Your freedom will always be yours, Clara. Always." Tears pricked at her eyes at the solemnity of his vow. "That's all anyone can truly ask for," she whispered. "The freedom to choose one's own path." "You've already given me that, Owen. Everything else is just possibility." Their eyes held, a wealth of unspoken feeling passing between them. They were still at the beginning of whatever this was becoming, still learning each other, still cautious. But in that moment, Clara felt the first real stirring of what might be love, not the desperate attachment she'd once mistaken for it in her youth, but something steadier, something built on mutual respect and shared understanding. The journey west began the next morning under clear skies. Owen had purchased a small wagon and team to transport their supplies, allowing Clara to ride in relative comfort when she tired of the saddle. They traveled alone now, without the herd or the other hands, following the route that would take them across the border into California. The landscape grew more dramatic as they progressed, with towering pines replacing the sagebrush of the Nevada desert and mountains rising majestically on the horizon. The air grew cooler and sweeter, filled with the scent of resin and wild herbs. They fell into an easy routine, making camp, each evening in whatever sheltered spot they could find, sharing the work of cooking and setting up their simple accommodations. Their conversations flowed more freely now, unobserved by others, ranging from the practical details of their journey to deeper exchanges about their hopes for the future. On the fourth night, as they sat beside their campfire after a simple but satisfying meal, Owen pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "I want to show you something," he said, spreading the document on the ground between them. It was a rough map, with various features sketched in a steady hand. "This is the property I'm going to look at. 200 acres along this creek with good water rights, valley floor for grazing, timber on the slopes for building. The nearest town is about 10 miles east." Clara studied the map, trying to envision the reality it represented. "It sounds beautiful." It could be, Owen agreed. With work. Lots of work. He hesitated, then added, I've been saving for this for nearly 8 years. Even with what I spent on your contract, I should have enough for the initial payment if the land proves to be as described. Clara looked up at him, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what he'd risked for her. You used your land money to free me, she said softly, without even knowing me. Owen met her gaze steadily. Some things are worth more than land, Clara. The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation, touched her more deeply than any flowery declaration could have. Clara found herself moving closer to him, drawn by the quiet integrity that had become increasingly precious to her. Owen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to thank you for all you've done. You don't need to thank me, he replied, equally soft. Seeing you free, seeing you become more yourself each day, that's all the thanks I need. Clara reached out, her hand finding his cheek in a tentative caress. Owen remained perfectly still, letting her set the pace of this new intimacy. What if I want to give more? She asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Owen turned his face slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Then it would be my honor to receive whatever you choose to give, he said. But only when you're ready. Only because you want to. The tenderness in his voice, the patience in his eyes, broke something open inside Clara, a wall she hadn't even realized she'd built around her heart. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, almost chaste, yet Clara felt it down to her toes, a spark of connection unlike anything she'd experienced before. Owen's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, neither demanding more nor pulling away, simply accepting what she offered and returning it in kind. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since Carson City, he admitted with a small smile. Only since Carson City, Clara teased, surprising herself with her boldness. I think I've been wanting to since somewhere around the Nevada-California border. Owen laughed softly, the sound warming her from within. Well, we've crossed that border now, he said. So you're free to want whatever you please. The double meaning wasn't lost on Clara. They had indeed crossed a border of sorts, not just between territories, but between the cautious friendship they'd maintained and something deeper, something with the potential to change both their lives permanently. I think, she said carefully, that what I want is to see this land of yours. And then we can talk about what comes next. Owen nodded, understanding her need to take things one step at a time. That sounds like a fine plan to me. They lingered by the fire a while longer, sitting closer now, occasionally exchanging glances that held new meaning. When they finally retired to their separate bedrolls, Clara fell asleep more quickly than she had in days, a sense of rightness settling over her like a comfortable blanket. The remaining days of their journey passed in a state of heightened awareness, each glance and casual touch charged with new significance. They maintained their respective boundaries. Owen was adamant that Clara have time and space to be certain of her own mind, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement that something had changed between them, something with the potential to grow into a lasting bond. On the afternoon of the 7th day, they crested a final ridge and Owen drew his horse to a halt, gesturing for Clara to join him. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley spread out below them. That's the land. Clara gasped softly at the vista before her. The property was even more beautiful than she had imagined from Owen's description, a verdant valley carved by a clear creek that glinted silver in the afternoon sun, surrounded by rolling hills covered in pine and oak. At the valley's edge, a small natural clearing offered a perfect site for a homestead, with views across the entire property. It's magnificent, she breathed. Owen studied her face, seeming to find her reaction more interesting than the land itself. You really think so? Yes, Clara said without hesitation. I can see why you've worked so hard for this. It feels like a place where one could build a life. Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening, a hope that hadn't been there before. That's exactly what I thought the first time I saw it, he said quietly. Not just land, a home. They made their way down into the valley, establishing camp near the proposed homestead site. As the sun set behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat side by side on a fallen log, contemplating the potential that lay before them. I'll meet with the land agent tomorrow, Owen said. If everything is in order, I can make the initial payment and file the claim. Clara nodded, her thoughts racing ahead to possibilities that both excited and terrified her. And then, Owen turned to face her fully. And then, Clara Vaughn, I have a proposition for you. Not a contract, he added quickly. An offer freely given and just as freely accepted or declined. Clara's heart quickened. I'm listening. Owen took a deep breath, then took her hands in his. I know we haven't known each other long. And I know that after what you've been through, the last thing you need is to feel rushed or pressured. So I want to be clear that there are no conditions attached to what I'm about to say. Owen, Clara said gently. Just tell me. He nodded, gathering his thoughts. I'm offering you a partnership, in this land, in whatever we build here. Stay with me, Clara, not as an employee or a guest, but as an equal. Help me turn this valley into a home. Clara stared at him, processing his words. Are you asking me to marry you? Eventually, yes, Owen admitted. When you're ready, if you're ever ready. But for now, I'm just asking you to stay, to give us a chance to see if what's growing between us is as real and lasting as I believe it could be. Clara was silent for a long moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just a future, but a voice in shaping that future. Not just protection, but partnership. Not just freedom from her past, but the freedom to create something new. There would be no promises from you, Owen continued when she didn't immediately respond. Only from me that you will always be free to go if that's what you choose, that your voice will be equal to mine in all decisions. That I will spend every day trying to be worthy of whatever trust you place in me. Tears filled Clara's eyes, not of sorrow but of a joy so unexpected and complete that it defied containment. Owen Armstrong, she said, her voice thick with emotion, you have already proven yourself worthy 100 times over. Hope dawned in his eyes. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, Clara leaned forward and kissed him, not the tentative kiss of days before, but one filled with promise and possibility. Owen responded in kind, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her closer, as though he could somehow convey through touch all the feelings he'd struggled to express in words. When they finally parted, both breathless and slightly dazed, Clara rested her forehead against his. Yes, she whispered. Yes to staying, yes to partnership, yes to seeing where this leads us. Owen's smile was radiant in the fading light. I can't promise you an easy life, he reminded her. Building a home from nothing will be hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work, Clara replied. And I'm no longer afraid of the future either. Not if we face it together. They remained by the fire late into the night, talking of practical matters and dreams alike, where to build the cabin that would be their first home, how to prepare for the coming winter, what crops might thrive in the valley soil. Clara suggested setting aside part of the land for a small school eventually, to serve the children of surrounding homesteads. Owen spoke of his plans for breeding horses, starting with just a few good mares and a stallion. In those hours of shared planning, Clara felt the last shadows of her time at the Gilded Cage finally recede. The dancer who had performed with empty eyes while her soul hid elsewhere was gone, replaced by a woman who looked to the future with clear-eyed purpose and hope. The next day, Owen rode to the nearest town to meet with the land agent, leaving Clara to explore the valley that might soon be their home. She walked the length of the creek, noting the best spots for a garden, mentally placing the cabin and outbuildings in the most advantageous locations. By the time she heard Owen's horse returning in the late afternoon, Clara had already begun to think of the land as theirs. The look on Owen's face as he dismounted told her all she needed to know. "It's done," he said, grinning broadly. "The land is ours." Clara flew into his arms without hesitation, laughing as he spun her around in celebration. "Ours," she repeated, loving the sound of the word. "Our land, our future." Owen set her down but kept his arms around her. "I brought something back from town," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a simple gold band with a small pearl set into the center. "This isn't a demand or an expectation," he said quickly. "It's a promise. Whenever you're ready, a month from now, a year, however long it takes, this will be waiting." Clara stared at the ring, then at the man holding it. In his eyes she saw everything she'd ever wanted but had stopped believing she deserved: respect, admiration, and something deeper that might just be love. "I don't need to wait," she said softly. "I know my own mind, Owen. I know my own heart." His eyes widened. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying yes," Clara confirmed. "Yes to partnership, yes to building a life here together, and yes to becoming your wife if that's truly what you want." "It's all I want," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "You, Clara, just you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then sealed their promise with a kiss that spoke of commitment and hope, and a future brighter than either had dared to imagine when they'd first met in a dusty saloon barely 2 weeks earlier. The wedding took place a month later in the small church in the nearest town. It was a simple ceremony, attended by a few neighbors they'd met during those weeks of building their first cabin, plus Hank, who had made the journey from Carson City when Owen wrote to tell him the news. Clara wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Owen had splurged on a new shirt and had actually let the local barber trim his hair for the occasion. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, each word a promise neither took lightly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said, beaming at the obvious devotion evident in the couple before him. "Mr. Armstrong, you may kiss your bride." As Owen's lips met hers, Clara felt the final pieces of her new life lock into place. From captivity to freedom, from isolation to belonging, from fear to love, the journey had been swift but profound, transforming her in ways she was only beginning to understand. That night, in the small cabin they had built together on their land, Clara and Owen began the next chapter of their story not as rescuer and rescued, but as equal partners in whatever the future might hold. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Owen taught their 3-year-old son, William, how to sit on his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, just a year old, babbled happily in Clara's arms, reaching toward her father and brother with chubby hands. The homestead had flourished under their joint care. The cabin had grown into a proper house, with a separate kitchen and 3 bedrooms. A barn stood nearby, housing the beginning of what was becoming a respected horse breeding operation. A garden provided vegetables for their table, and a small orchard was just beginning to bear fruit. But more important than these physical manifestations of their success was the love that had grown between them, a love built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the daily choice to face life's challenges together. Owen had kept every promise he'd made that day by the campfire, and Clara had discovered depths of strength and resilience within herself she'd never imagined possible. Once a week, Clara rode to a neighboring homestead where several families gathered their children for lessons. She had found her calling as a teacher after all, though on her own terms and in her own time. As she watched Owen lift William from the pony and swing him high in the air, the little boy's laughter ringing out across the valley, Clara felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The journey from the Gilded Cage to this moment had been unlikely, unexpected, and entirely transformative. Owen looked up then, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 5 years, his smile still made her heart quicken. He set William down and crossed to the porch, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as though her contentment remained his highest priority. "Beyond measure," Clara replied honestly, leaning into his embrace. "Every day." As the sun set behind the western hills, painting their valley in gold just as it had that first evening, Clara reflected on the strange and winding path that had led her here. A forced contract had become freedom. A desperate situation had yielded unexpected joy. A chance encounter had blossomed into lasting love. And the dance that had once been her prison had become a celebration, performed now only for the pleasure it brought to her, to Owen, and to the family they had created together in this place that was truly, finally, home.